Hello and welcome to Lights Out, the Formula One podcast for fans, by fans. I'm Will, and as I look across the digital garage as always, I'm joined by my co-driver and co-host Sam. Hi Sam, how are you doing?
Hello Will, hello listeners, how are you?
I'm very well, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. Yeah, not too bad. It feels like a little while since we last did one of these. For reference listeners, it's 13 days since our last recording, so yeah, it feels like a little while.
Yeah, because we recorded the Lewis Hamilton episode straight after the Saudi one, so yeah, it's nice to get back in front of the mic and discuss another interesting, fun-packed race weekend. How did you find the early start, the 6 a.m. race start?
Well, with a young daughter myself, it's I'm sort of hardwired, used to getting up early now, so it wasn't too much of a hit. And obviously, being an old man, I go to bed quite early these days. So yeah, I was actually already awake at 5:15. My alarm didn't even have to go off. I was awake and
nice.
putting the grid walk on ready. How about you?
You got a lot of the pre-build up.
I did, yeah, which was pretty good actually. Yeah, Jensen did quite a good job. He's quite popular, Jensen Button. I realised, he was getting hugs from people that I would never have thought would hug, a former racing driver who.
Kylie Minogue loved him.
Yeah, I know. Can't believe it. Fair play.
Yeah.
How about you? How was your ritual getting up for it?
Unsuccessful. I went to bed setting an alarm on my Apple Watch to wake me up at 5 to 6, and I just sort of kept him waking up in the night, thinking like any minute now it's going to go off, or it must be nearly soon. And then I woke up and I checked down at my watch and I was like, oh, it says 5-2, brilliant. I've literally woken up as the alarm's gone off. It's not vibrating, but I've woken up as the alarm's gone off. Brilliant, there. And then as my brain was sort of waking up, I realised it didn't say 5 to 6, it said 5 to 7. So I'd missed the first 55 minutes of the race. So then sprinting to the TV to get it set up in time. So yeah, I didn't see the first 55 minutes live. And my family WhatsApp group chat was, and I said, what have I missed? And my brother said, only just, I think was it a red flag and some safety cars. I was like, oh, brilliant. So, but I've caught up, so I'm all up to speed. So yeah.
Yeah, you were fortunate to miss that bit, I think, because there was a lot of waiting around for the race to restart. So yeah, I don't know how many laps you missed, but it wasn't a huge number.
I think it was about 58 lap race, wasn't it? I think I tuned in about 28. I think it was.
Okay, yeah,
so not much. And you did send me a very helpful voice note, sort of recapping the race as well.
I did.
I should give you credit for that. Maybe that's a service you could offer out to listeners, just a race recap of through WhatsApp. And so with that, let's go on with the episode. So Sam, who won the race?
Well, Will, in shocking news, the fastest driver in the fastest car won the Grand Prix.
How many times are we going to have to trot this out? Because I think it's going to become a theme, as we've discussed already, that the Red Bull dominance and the Max dominance is going to be a regular theme this season.
It is, and it's not even like it was a perfect weekend for them either. I mean, we'll get into the nuts and bolts of the race itself, and I'm sure there were a few things that frustrated Max, and he was pretty quick to point those out after the race had finished. But even in qualifying and practice and stuff, it wasn't going great for Red Bull. I mean, Checo had a really shocking free practice, and then obviously binned it in Q1, had to start literally last from the pit lane in the end. And even though Max ended up on pole, he was really struggling with downshifts again. He can't seem to get happy with the car, and yet they're still finding a way to take pole position quite comfortably. So, yeah, a bit ominous when they actually get themselves together and have a really good weekend. But yeah, no, another pretty dominant weekend from a Red Bull perspective.
It was interesting because when I tuned in, Max had I think about 7 or 8 second gap between him and Lewis in second, and I think if he needed to, he could have pushed much harder, and he could have had a much. But I think he was basically coasting as well. Yeah. And poor Checo, after sort of where the last race weekend ended with, it sort of saying, "Here we go, we've got teammates battling for the world championship," and he'd made some quite spicy comments, sort of saying about Red Bull's basically set up for one driver to win, and Christian Horner sort of publicly rebuking him.
Yeah,
I think everyone's quite excited for sort of round 2 of the proper championship fight, and everything went wrong for Checo this weekend. Really, I mean, the best thing for him was he managed to claw it back to 5th place, but not a good weekend for his title assault.
No, sorry, Sergio Perez fans, but this is kind of classic Checo though. Really, like he has these flashes of brilliance where he'll win a race and he can show he's got the speed to at least match or sometimes beat Max Verstappen, but he can't keep it together for more than a race or two at a time, and he will have a shocker like way too regularly, and this was yet another one. And unfortunately, when you've got a teammate like Max, and it's exactly the same. I feel exactly the same about Checo as I did about Bottas when he was racing Hamilton. You just knew at some point the consistency wasn't going to be there, and his teammate was going to clean up, and that's exactly what's unfortunately likely to happen this season because Checo just can't string a series of races together.
And I don't think Red Bull are that worried about it really, because they know the car is so quick that Max, their number one driver, will win the world championship, and they'll get enough 1-2s or 1-3s that Checo that they'll clean up their constructors as well. So they're not like they'll suddenly start searching around or putting pressure on Checo. They might do a bit publicly just to make it improve a bit, but it's not like they'll be really unhappy with him as well. I did enjoy Max going testing out the Red Bull as a lawnmower towards the very end. I did think that was quite entertaining. Him sort of cutting across the grass in the final corner. I thought that was quite entertaining.
Yeah, well, that was the one blot on an otherwise extremely strong performance. I suppose his starts weren't great either. I mean, he got done at the start a couple times, didn't he? So that does seem to be if there's one flaw with that car, it does seem to be a bit slow off the line. Everything else about it is perfect, but that one particular thing seems to be a problem for it. But
both race starts he got done quite badly, didn't he? And then the third one he basically put it in a position where he knew he couldn't be beaten, but he was quite rookie. Well, not rookie, that's a bit harsh, but he did. He really allowed Mercedes to really attack him. He didn't put much of a defense.
Yeah, he was quite tentative. I actually think Max's comments after the race I thought were really interesting. So
what were they? I didn't see those.
So I sometimes won't bother with post-race comments because if the race has just been an absolute slam dunk without much excitement, like what are the drivers realistically going to say? Unless it's been a really poor weekend for a driver that wasn't expecting it, or a particularly good one for one that wasn't. I tend not to worry too much about the post-race comments, but this week I thought because of kind of how the race had gone, the controversy with the red flags, which we'll talk about, and the fact that there'd been a bit of needle between him and Lewis about the overtake that Lewis put on him at the start, I thought, I'll tune in and listen and just see what Max had to say. And his comments about the overtake in particular, I thought were really interesting. So I put aside the whole kind of he was overly aggressive stuff, but that just made me laugh because Max Verstappen being critical of another driver being overly aggressive is just so beyond the line. I'm just like, okay,
take a look in the mirror, Max. Take a look in the mirror.
Yeah, exactly. Sure. It would be like me having a go at someone for being an overly passionate Arsenal fan. It's like, shut up, Sam. Come on, get back in your box. No, his comment the comment that made me really take notice was he said about the Lewis Hamilton overtake. He had more. I had more to lose than Lewis. And bearing in mind, this is the third race, and he's being overtaken by a guy who's got 7 world championships, and is probably in the second fastest car. I took that to mean, well, Lewis knows he's never going to win the world championship this year. He could just take us both out if he wanted to. He's got nothing to lose, whereas I do. And what that says to me is Max's only concern is his teammate this season. He has absolutely no fear of any other driver in any other car coming close to him this year. And that is quite telling, I think.
I think also as well, it sort of shows you that how he sort of, the rivalry, even though they're not in this quickest of cars, they're not in equal cars, but the rivalry between him and Lewis, that he's pretty wary of the threat that Lewis poses, and that the fact he could hit into him or take him out is obviously, he's not sort of dismissing 2021 as a one-off season. He's obviously still very sort of concerned about the threat that Lewis poses as a sort of racer alongside him. But I think you're right. He is on. He only has to look down the grid and see that the only one that's capable of probably getting close to him is Checo.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and this is it. I think I think as I said at the start of the season, the only 2 drivers that I felt could even come close to Max or beating Max were Charles and Lewis in their respective cars. Now, Ferrari, again, we'll talk about in a bit. That's not going to happen. Mercedes are quite far back this season, but even then, realistically, they're probably the only team, and he's the only driver that's likely to put up a challenge beyond Max's teammate this year. But yeah, I think Max. It seems to me Max is acutely aware that like that Red Bull is so far ahead, his only threat is his teammate. Yeah. But even then, I think we've discussed at length how that's not really much of a threat, is it really?
I want to come on to the Mercedes and Red Bull pace, because I think there were some quite interesting things we saw in the race that sort of were quite eye-opening, I think, of that. But I've got a theory.
Okay.
I think the Red Bull, and they are being very tactical. I think they're deliberately not pushing the car flat out, and I think they are deliberately sort of doing enough to sort of keep themselves out of like harm's way, but not, driving off into the sunset, because I think they are very concerned that the FIA could step in and issue rules. And I think on the whole they've managed it. And you've said in the last two episodes, the last two race episodes, that how many times have you heard on the radio them sort of telling Max to slow down?
Yeah.
I think there's definitely some sort of strategy to sort of not run away with it and to keep him, does not show off the car's full pace. But I think that really slipped when they race against another car. And you saw that with Hamilton on the overtake with Hamilton and DRS. So I think on the highlights, but I saw, because I was asleep at this point, um, it was quite good battling for a few corners, and then it got to, I can't remember which turn it is, but the DRS zone.
Yeah.
And by the time at the end of the DRS zone, Max was a good car length ahead of him, and it was that, that shows you the pace of a car. It made again Lewis look like an F2 car and him like an F1 car, and that's not on Lewis or Mercedes. That's on the genius and the impressive nature of the Red Bull. But I think there's a definite ploy and tactic to not, push it flat out, because I think they're very concerned about the FIA sort of stopping the party for them.
Yes, I 100% agree with you. I mean, to some extent, I mean, all Formula One teams control their pace, protect their tires, and all that kind of stuff, and they will strictly ask their drivers to drive certain times based on whatever the kind of race situation is and how their tires are looking. But in this situation, yeah, their lead is so enormous that it's like as I mentioned a couple of times, like Gianpiero Lambiase is always on the radio to Max, asking him to slow down and telling him exactly what speed he wants him to drive at. And yeah, you can hear the Red Bull kind of people getting a bit shirty when they're going for like fastest laps and stuff, and quite clearly like going against the requests that they've had. So yeah, I agree with you that the only reason they have for doing that is protecting their kind of advantage that they have. I think in like there's a generally held opinion in Formula One that like a half second gap is big, but it's not the end of the world. But that car looks a second a lap quicker if it wanted to be, and that would be a massive problem. So yeah, I agree. I think they are really, they're not, I wouldn't say like they're sandbagging the car or anything like that. It doesn't look like they've got the power turned down or anything, because there are, as you've alluded to with the Hamilton overtake, occasions where they need to have the power ready to go. But in general, they are really controlling their drivers.
Yeah, and I think also you can see is whenever they need half a second, they can just they can push for it straight away. Or I think I read at the start of the race, within a couple of laps, I think by the time DRS came in, Max was already 2 seconds ahead of the next car. So like, it can pull a 2 second gap pretty quickly, which is unheard of in Formula One. And I think Lewis is bang on the money when he said in Saudi Arabia that we've never seen a car so dominant and so impressive as this. And hats off to Adrian Newey. I did see that his contract is up for renewal at the end of the season, so maybe he decides he wants to go and fix Ferrari. That would be something, or fix the W15. Who knows?
It would be great. It would be great if he went somewhere else, and we've got to see the impact he has at a team that's not as successful, but it feels unlikely. I think as well, one point I would make about the Red Bull stuff as well is like Lewis got a bit of stick for those comments, because the gap that he and Rosberg managed to build in various races during like the 2015, 2016 seasons was so big. But what all the commentary seems to have forgotten is that Lewis was racing Nico Rosberg. They had no option. They could not slow the cars down because they had two blokes basically going at it hammer and tong every single weekend. You can't ask them to drive slower; it just wouldn't happen. Whereas right now, like that doesn't happen with Red Bull.
Well, in Bahrain, we didn't. Max pulled away from Sergio pretty quickly, and there was never a contest or a battle for the lead. So it's not like they're having to fight each other, because Max is just much quicker. So very impressive. And Mercedes, quite an unexpected result this weekend. We saw Lewis on the podium, George sadly a DNF. What did you make of Mercedes' unexpected rise this weekend?
Yeah, they've obviously found something, haven't they? In terms of the setup, they haven't really changed any parts on the car. I don't think they've bought any upgrades. They're planning to bring some for Imola, but they've definitely got the car into a non kind of techie F1 fans is a really wanky term, but they've got the car into a good working window, Will. And what that generally means is it's a bit more pliable for the drivers. They can chuck it around a bit more, and it's a bit more efficient. And this is probably a good track for them as well. So, it was quite surprising. I think Aston Martin and Alonso were definitely a bit surprised about the pace that those two Mercedes had in comparison to them, because obviously Aston have seemingly had the advantage, or Alonso in particular has had the advantage the last couple of races. So, no, it's good. It was a good weekend for Mercedes. You can see the drivers were beaming after qualifying, and
I was going to say, Lewis seemed much happier in the bits I saw of him, sort of to camera, and just his body mat language just seemed much more positive than last week, the previous race weekend.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I still have this nagging suspicion that if Mercedes, and this is a big if, because as we've alluded to, the gap to Red Bull does feel much bigger than it actually looks at the moment. If Mercedes do manage to find some pace, I think there will be an interesting kind of Lewis-George dynamic develop at some point. But right now, it looks to me that like Mercedes have had a similar conversation as they had last year, whereby they basically acknowledged that they weren't going to win the the championship, most likely because the opposition is so much further ahead than they are. And they've probably just battened down the hatches a bit and got to work and got their drivers working in a way that's a bit more, I don't know, collegiate, let's say, than before. Because I think it's difficult when drivers come into a season expecting to challenge for a world championship and then watch their opponents drive off into the distance at almost a second a lap in some cases. It looked to me like George and Lewis sort of made their peace with the prospect of chasing Max down over the next 20 races, and they were much happier to kind of have a conversation about making sure they were definitely second, and finding ways to tune the car properly. So it was a really good weekend for them. Hopefully it can continue, and I just really hope they can find something, and the upgrades for Imola really bring them a bit closer to Red Bull. Not hoping they like beat Red Bull, but just at least getting into a position where the fights are a bit more even than as we saw yesterday, when Max breezed past Lewis, and as you referenced, like he made the overtake, and then by the time the next corner had arrived, he was already a second and a half ahead, and like Lewis was out the DRS zone, and that was it. That was, job done. Fingers crossed. What did you make of Mercedes?
I was going to say I'm encouraged to see them sort of. It definitely seemed like they got lucky with the setup, and that sort of unlocked a lot of the performance. And I tuned into qualifying on Saturday morning, and that was I was surprised to see them line up second and third, and they both looked pretty quick, and they both looked pretty happy as well. I think the other thing that will give Mercedes and George and Lewis a lot of confidence was the race starts, because they both drove really, really well to get past Max, and to be able to if they can have a bit more performance, then they know they can get past Max in the first corner. It's not like he's driving off into the sunset. And I enjoyed that first lap where George gets ahead and then Lewis gets ahead the next corner as well. I just thought it was a brilliant sequence, really. As a Mercedes fan, it might be one of the highlights of the season already. seeing that, and I was kind of hoping for a Max engine failure towards the end, or Lewis to work his magic on the restart. But I'm feeling optimistic. I think good things will come to Lewis eventually this season, and George as well. I think a good season for them, with both of them to end up with a race win.
Yeah, there are wins there, definitely. I was really hoping that final restart was going to be a bit more fun than it turned out to be. I'm not going to comment on where the cars ended up parked on their grids, in their grid boxes.
Well,
but
we'll come on to that. We'll come on to that.
Yes.
All I will say, the final thing I'll say on Mercedes is that I was very encouraged to see the Aston Martin sort of put in its box a little bit, really. Lewis was able to keep that gap with Fernando through that middle stint. And then, I think when Fernando started pushing, Lewis wasn't sort of a sitting duck. He could push as well and was able to sort of rebuild the gap. I was a bit worried after having seen what I'd seen previous weekends that Fernando would push and he would just get close and then, bye-bye Lewis. But actually it worked out. It worked out very well. Obviously not a good weekend for George. And in a break to usual format, I understand you want to give your Latifi here and now because of not to George.
No.
But over to you to issue your third ever Latifi.
Yeah, it was looking really good for George. I mean, he had a great start, got ahead of Max, and then Lewis managing to get ahead of Max was kind of big for the program as well for him, because it gave him an opportunity to build a bit of a gap himself. Driven a really good race so far, had an excellent qualifying, as we've alluded to. Yeah, it was all going so well. And then unfortunately, we were robbed of what looked like a very exciting three-way battle for the lead, at least for a little bit, because Alex Albon lost control of his Williams. Now, I'm sure you're going to cover William on Williams in a minute, but my Latifi is for Alex Albon because I was so apocalyptically cross that I'd been robbed. I was robbed, or we were robbed, of what looked like a really good fight between three drivers. Because exactly at that moment, as soon as Albon binned it, Lewis was like chucking it up the inside of George, trying to get past, and then Max was trying to get past Lewis as well. And you just had three of them basically going in three abreast into like turn 9, and then Albon bins the car, and I was so annoyed about it because it felt like one of those few and far between opportunities to see three really good drivers go at it. So yeah, I'm giving my Latifi selfishly. Sorry, Alex Albon. I know you had a pretty good weekend apart from binning it, but yeah, you ruined what looked like it would be a really good, fun battle for a bit. So yeah,
and
one Latifi for Alex Albon.
And it did mess up George's strategy, didn't it? Because he pitted, and then it was red flagged straight afterwards as well. But I like that. I like that we've had we've combined two features in one here, because you've covered off the Latifis. I'll do William on Williams. Yeah, obviously it was a Albon mistake that meant he binned it into the wall and caused the red flag and the safety car. So not good for him. And then poor old the Sergeant, Logan. He had a bit of a shocker as well. Not a good weekend for him. I think in the restart at the end of the race, he puts it in the back of Nick de Vries and somehow escapes a 5-place grid penalty when it's very similar to sort of what Carlos did. I imagine I wouldn't surprise me if it got applied for the next race in Baku. But yeah, he had a bit of a shock as well. And I think also what's we'll come on to this later. What's most damaging for Williams about this weekend is, before he binned it, Albon was 6th, I think. And if he'd held on to that would have been crucial points. Yep. And then, neither of them have scored points. And then McLaren have had a really good weekend, scored 12 points, and have jumped up the standings, the constructor standings quite a bit. And they've not capitalized on that opportunity to sort of win points, really. So
it's exactly what I alluded to a couple of weeks ago about Williams.
You
they
called
look
it,
really good, but they've got to make the most of this speed advantage they've got right now. And particularly, weirdly, I think Alex Albon was the fastest driver in Sector 2 every single session throughout the whole weekend.
Yeah. He was rapid in qualifying. I was really, really impressed by him in qualifying.
Yeah, they look really good. And so to kind of cough up the opportunity for a 6th place is poor for him, and for a driver of his quality. Had a really good season last year, had a really good start to the year this year, but it's mistakes like that, and they cost you significant points on days like this, that you get to the end of the season, and if Williams have lost out on a position in the championship by 5 points, they know where they can look to find them.
And that'd be serious money. They'd miss out. For a small team like Williams, that probably is, every position matters hugely for them.
Yep.
Before we go to a break, I thought we'd just cover off Ferrari. What a terrible weekend on all fronts. I feel like this will also be another theme. Every weekend we'll say how good Red Bull has been, and we'll say how awful Ferrari has been. I mean, Charles DNFing and sort of beaching his car in the gravel was not very good. And then Carlos causing an incident, which I feel, he did cause it, and I do feel a bit sorry for him, but not a good weekend for him as well. I've got an interesting fact for you, Sam.
Oh, go on.
This was the worst start to a season since the point system changed in 2010 for Ferrari.
Yikes. Wow,
I know, right?
13 years. God.
I know, right? I feel like Charles Leclerc is probably just banging his head against his hospitality, his driving accommodation in frustration every week.
I'm calling it now. Charles is moving to Mercedes.
You reckon?
Yeah, 100%. As soon as Lewis has had enough, because we talked about Lewis in the last episode. Listeners, feel free to go back and listen to our future Lewis Hamilton predictions and a lot of history about him as well in the last episode. But Lewis, either way, he's not going to be in the sport for more than the next couple of years, I think. And if Charles has any sense, he'll be thinking about a move.
Yeah,
and maybe even sooner. I mean, I don't know. It's hard to see any other teams getting in there, and I don't think they'd put Charles in the same team as Max. Maybe
no,
I don't know. Maybe
no.
Well, it would be very against their MO, wouldn't it? But it would be fun.
Christian Horner won't need him. It will say, I've got the best driver on the grid. I don't need him. I've got 3-time world champion. I'm already electing him. I've already called it earlier that we've the 3-time world champion. I can see that as well. I think I can see Charles leaving Ferrari out of frustration, just fed up at the the number of mistakes and just sort of the situations the team is putting him in. Really,
Mm.
When you look at him, he just looks so frustrated. His body language just looks like he's fed up, and I think for him, he'll be really annoyed that he's not even in the conversation for the title of the season.
Yeah.
I think he really enjoyed it and he really reveled off it last season. At the start, I thought he was sort of at some points was doing some of his best ever driving, but I think he will find it really hard to have had that sort of taste of a championship battle at the start of last season, and not be in the fight at all now.
So I think he and Lando are both just too good. They're drivers that are just too good to be stuck fighting in the midfield for the best years of their careers. So
yeah,
I think they'll both be contemplating a move, I'm sure, sooner rather than later, but particularly Charles.
I would like to see Charles and George. I think that'd be good fun to support. I think that'd be a good thing to get behind.
Yeah, definitely.
What happens if Charles and Lewis switch places?
I don't think Lewis would drive for Ferrari. I mean,
he's talked about it in the past, but I think it's unlikely. But it would be quite something, wouldn't it, if he ended up in red and
yeah. I mean, maybe I'm doing him a disservice, but like if you're going to make that move and do the whole kind of Michael Schumacher and almost similar to what Lewis did when he moved to Mercedes, but if you're going to do that whole kind of move to an underperforming team and be a really important cog in revolutionizing how that team works to get to a point where they can challenge for a championship, it feels like that ship sort of sailed for him really. Now I don't know. I mean, he may be prepared to do something like that, but that's a long project by the looks of it, because Ferrari are going backwards again, and they're like the fourth fastest team now. They're not even the second quickest. So
yeah, I think that's fair. I think also as well, I think Lewis has made comments in the past about it would be great to wear the red of the Scuderia. But I think he probably wanted that sort of like history sort of moment, you go in and turn the team around and do what Schumacher did. But he's probably realised he's done that with Mercedes, and he doesn't need, he's made Mercedes that dominant team this season. So in the recent history, and he's made them very historic. So he doesn't need to go to Ferrari because, like you say, he probably realizes he doesn't have the time or the urge to do that.
Yes, I think also he must be conscious that Ferrari is a bit of a graveyard of champions as well. I mean, we've seen plenty of others, Vettel and Alonso.
It broke them both.
Yeah, they make moves with all the hope of being the next Schumacher and taking the team back to the top. I mean, to be fair, Vettel got relatively close, didn't he, a couple of years, and then for it not to happen, I think my suspicion. I don't feel like Lewis will drive for anybody other than Mercedes. Like he'll hang it up when he's ready.
Yeah. Well, we've somehow brought it back to Lewis's future again. We just love talking about Lewis's future. Let's hope it's exciting as we discuss it every week. With that, we'll take a quick break. Good day and welcome back from the break. We hope you had a jolly old time. I thought we'd start the next section of the show, Sam, by asking you what was the most sort of dramatic moment. Was there any key moments of drama from the weekend that we've yet to cover across? Is there any key moments that have sort of got you excited, entertained, irate, angry?
No, not at all. Nothing of note happened, Will.
Thanks very much for listening.
Yes, the FIA's perennial efforts to ruin the sport that they govern. It was a pretty crackers race. I mean, it was quite entertaining. We'll give it that, and we'll probably come on to the kind of entertainment stuff in a bit. But it was a bit mad. So obviously, we've discussed Alex Albon binning the car of his own accord, and that resulting in a first safety car and then a red flag being thrown, which I think we'll probably both agree was a pretty debatable process, never mind a decision to red flag at that point. And then Kevin Magnussen, they seem to suggest it was the sun in his eyes or something, but he sort of seemed to forget where the track went and like smacked the rear right corner of his car.
It was impressive. The damage he did was impressive.
It was a very clean cut, wasn't it? Right across the axle, took the wheel off, sent the wheel flying off down the road, and then obviously a bunch of debris everywhere else, and that threw another red flag, and then another restart, and then obviously from that restart we had the absolute carnage and pandemonium of Sainz bumping into Alonso, and then the Alpines smashing into each other, and it just being total carnage.
And then we had Logan Sargent behind as well.
Yes, yeah, and then another red flag. So the third red flag of the day was thrown, and then the absolute nonsense that followed, trying to figure out what was supposed to happen and who was meant to finish where and who was supposed to get what points.
With 2 laps, was it 2 laps left or 1 lap left on the board?
Yes, with 1 lap remaining, and then we had the procession behind the safety car, and then they all just crossed the line without any racing taking place. There was actually really good, I thought, what was actually quite a good debate between Ted and Crofty on comms about whether or not you define that as racing or not, because they always say, oh, certain number of like racing laps or whatever, and Ted was basically saying, of course, being Ted and always being correct, because Ted is the absolute crown jewel of Sky Sports F1.
Retweet.
He was saying, well, how can you classify those as racing laps if they're not racing each other and they're just shilly-shallying around behind the bloody safety car? So yes, wasn't a good weekend for the FIA, was it? Which I'm sure you're about to open up a can about. Would you like to?
Well, you provided a very helpful summary for those that may have not caught the end of the race of what went down and sort of the chaos of the FIA intervening. I mean, it's the first ever race we've had 3 red flags in.
Was it?
Which is which is quite crazy.
That is crazy when you think about some of the madness we've seen down the years.
So where to start? So I'm the Albon one. I'm a bit 50-50 on. I can kind of see why they called it, but also like at the end of the day, the car was could have been craned out whilst the safety car was going on, and then there was just gravel on the track, so they could have just brushed it out. But maybe it was difficult to drive past and brushing it there, because sometimes they've gone through the pit lane if there's debris on the start line. So that one's maybe 50-50. I really don't think Magnussen, that crash deserved a red flag. He managed to park the car up near a recovery point, so it was easy for them to get the car off the circuit, and then all that was really left was a loose wheel. So that could have easily been picked up by by a marshal as the safety car was going around. And I just think it was there was an opportunity to create a spectacle. It was like, here we go. We've had this incident. Why don't we pull down a red flag down, and then we've got a nice 2-lap shootout for the lead. And it just seemed obvious for what had actually occurred. It wasn't a massive pile-on for the Magnussen one that had meant it. It was quite an easy sort of recoverable thing. And you could tell the drivers really weren't happy about it as well. Some of them were sort of saying, we've red flagged for that, really. I mean, although I think you said this about Lewis did spot all the debris and go, yeah, there's too much debris. We need to stop this. So obviously spotting opportunity to go for the win. And this is quite interesting. So from Magnussen's crash, it then took an hour till the checkered flag.
Oh god. It felt like longer.
Yeah. Well, so the race was an early race, and I thought it'd wrap up by like 8:00. I had somewhere to be by 9:00, and I was very concerned I was not going to make it to the place I need to be on time. I couldn't be late for it. So yeah, what a farce of an end of a race. That I think it was probably the slowest end to a race that Max will ever have to since probably his karting days. It was a boring procession along the line, so the entertainment value didn't finish there. And also, I've got an interesting fact for you here.
Mm-hmm.
The race, we've only had 11 races in 550 since the safety car has sort of been introduced in Formula One. Only 11 have finished under the safety car, so one in 50. So it's quite a rare thing.
It is. So less than, on average once every couple of years then. No, less than that. Even less often than once every couple of years. Wow.
Yeah. And then so that annoyed me with all the red flag nonsense. But then we restarted again, and we thought, oh, here we go, we're gonna have a great shootout for the win, and for the final bits of points and stuff for 2 laps. And then, like as you very well described, just chaos. 3 collisions in the space of the first 2 corners. And then just the rules are just nonsense. Honestly nonsense. So because they didn't pass through sector 1, all the action that we witnessed, and all the crashes and people being wiped out, some of it did apply and some of it didn't. So the Alpines, sorry lads, you're out of the race. Alonso, you've been kiboshed out of third. Good for you. You're back in third. But Carlos, don't worry. You've caused an incident, but you're still getting the 5-place grid penalty. And Crofty was saying on the commentary, was saying the problem is they couldn't decide an order because they hadn't gone through the first sector. They couldn't go from from the timesheet because they didn't make it through the first sector before the red flag was issued again. But they were in the order. They would have come into the pit lane in. So it's not like they didn't have an order. It wasn't like they were all jumbled up orders. People coming in, like, it wasn't like someone else was coming first that wasn't Max. They came in an order, so they could have stuck with that order and started again from that. And I just think it really ruined it to have some things apply to some people because it was more terminal. So like the Alpines, but then Alonso get third place despite crashing in third place in the action. It's like you're watching something that's then completely pointless. I did feel quite sorry for Carlos, although he was guilty. I did feel sorry for that he was sort of victim to that as well.
Mm.
And I think what was the worst thing about it all was no one had a clue what was going on when that third red flag went off, because no one knew what the order was. It took them ages to determine what the order was. And I think as a fan, it was boring. It was ridiculous watching people. Sky, fair play to them. They were trying to make sense of it, but they were all openly debating with one another because none of them had an idea of what the rules were. Trying to think of precedent, what happened previously, and it was just a terrible, terrible end to the race. Finishing under a safety car. Why going out of the pits counts as a lap when they weren't racing, and then to finish in a procession was completely. Why not have an actual racing finish and not count those sort of formation laps as part of the actual race? Because what an absolute waste of everyone's time. And I think it left a lot of Formula One fans very, very annoyed. And the criticism is rightly at the FIA's door, and they need to fix it. And as you can probably tell, they are my consecutive winner for the Latifi. This is back to back. I did joke saying I wonder how many they'll get. I was surprised that they've got 2 in 2 weeks. Will they make a hat trick in Baku? A circuit
Probably.
a circuit that has many dramas in it. Who knows? But we'll have to see about that. But yeah, I felt good to get that off my chest. But yeah, what did you make of it all?
Oh God, where to start? So I agree with you. The whole thing is a farce. I think the first thing to say at the top of the bill is Formula One is an excellent sport being governed by idiots. Frankly, I mean, it seems like we've had years of this now, and it doesn't seem to improve. I mean, even the whole kind of Michael Massey stuff. Like, once again, we're in a situation where there's one race director. He's got too much to do. There's too many things for him to worry about all at once, and that means everything is slow. And it just feels like there's a distinct lack of control. And then you throw in the kind of the sporting regulation stuff, and they are just excessively complicated. It's way too much. It's mental. And the fact that we're having a discussion, or Sky commentary are having a discussion about the difference between what the FIA's perception of reality is and what our perception as fans of reality is madness. We all saw the Alpines crash into each other. We all saw the Sargent incident. We all saw Sainz. Lol. Yes, it was Sainz's fault, but it did seem very harsh to apply a penalty, given that, according to the FIA, none of that happened. That whole debate is just a total nonsense. It happened. I don't care if it happened in sector 2, sector 3. A whole lap was done, 18 laps were done, or even just one corner was done. It happened. The order is the order. Why are you mucking about with it and saying you have to go back to whatever it was before because a sector hadn't been completed? That is just ludicrous.
It's almost like they're watching with their eyes closed and going well, we didn't see it. You've got cameras. This is not the 1920s where there's no record of what's actually going on. They can see everything, so they could have easily established an order. So yeah, I completely agree.
And there are so many other situations where the order gets totally messed up because of incidents or rain or whatever else, but you don't apply some weird sense that only a certain percentage of a lap or a certain percentage of a race has been completed, therefore you can't apply those rules, or you can't apply that kind of order. It's a total nonsense. Anyway, yeah, they need to really think about that because it makes no sense at all. What I will say is despise watching Formula One cars drive around slowly behind a safety car and watching the laps tick down. That, like, if they're going to do that, if they're going to find ways to, or if they're going to apply the use of a safety car, it should not count towards the race distance. I don't think. Like, it's detracting from the spectacle. It's robbing fans of racing. It's stupid, and I can. The reason I have some very small amount of sympathy for the FIA, particularly with the Albon incident, is because they just got the process wrong. Like, they saw the incident with Albon, and they should have just taken a minute, looked at what was in front of them, and either made a decision to call the safety car and say, "Do you know what? Probably doesn't warrant a set, but probably doesn't warrant a red flag. Suck it up. We're going to have a few laps behind the safety car. Everybody, sorry." Or you throw a red flag in that instance. You don't call one safety car, have George pit and everybody else try and take advantage of that situation, as any good tactical team would do, and then throw a red flag thinking, "Oh, bugger, we've got it wrong," kind of thing.
Yeah, I completely agree.
It's so bad. It's just so poor. Like, at least get the process right and make your minds up. But on a principle perspective, so I agree with you. I'm not sure necessarily all of those events constituted a requirement for a red flag. But what I would say is, I'm sort of on board with the maybe a red flag should be used more regularly than historically, because it wasn't always like this, was it? Like, I mean, as I think we talked a bit about this earlier, like, red flags were a very uncommon thing to see in Formula One for a long time. Like, I remember watching for years and don't remember seeing one. So
that's what we were saying before we started recording. That I think 10 years ago, a red flag was a very, very rare occurrence.
Yeah,
and now it's almost like the go-to.
It is, and I don't mind. I don't necessarily mind that as a position, because it's much more interesting for fans. You don't lose race distance following cars following a safety car around, and it reduces the likelihood for those cars to pick up punctures and wherever else, trying to avoid debris and all that sort of stuff. But they really need to, like, tighten up what their requirements are for those different things, because you've got three options, right? You've got the virtual safety car, you've got the full safety car, and you've got a red flag, in that order, in terms of kind of. What do you want us? How should I describe it? The kind of the relative importance of the situation, or the impact,
the severity of the situation, right? Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. So depending on the severity of the incident, you call one of those three things. And I generally think, like, if you've got stuff on the racing line and on the circuit, fine, call a red flag, so be it. Like, if that's how you're going to manage it, at least be clear that that's how you're going to manage it with teams and fans from the outset. Call it early, and everybody knows what they're meant to be doing. So they need to tighten that process up. And then, I mean, we've alluded to whole kind of points and, like, what happens after an incident and going back to what it was before all of that stuff had happened. Like, that is just a total nonsense, like, needs sorting out. Because someone like Nico Hulkenberg was robbed of a fourth place that, like, if they just by some miracle decided, oh, actually, no, this one, we're just going to call it a safety car, even though the incident's very similar to a red flag incident, he gets to keep his fourth place. Like, how is that the right way to decide who gets what? Like, it's just, it's totally mad. The rules need sorting out, and the FIA really need to, like, find a better way to oversee a Grand Prix, because clearly having one person responsible for so much means things like the mistakes we saw around the Albon incident get made. It costs teams dearly and doesn't provide any clarity on process for fans or teams. So, not good.
I completely agree. I think, just like you say, it's clarifying what they want to use them for is a really helpful first step. Like you say, take a minute to decide, okay, let's just wave yellows, and then, oh, hang on a second, this is really serious. This is a red flag, or actually, we think we can clear this up with a safety car. What I'm starting to get very concerned about Formula One as a sport is that sporting decisions are no longer sporting decisions; they're entertainment decisions. And this all stems back from Abu Dhabi. I'm sorry to bring it up, but like, I'm not really sorry, but like, what makes the better spectacle? What's going to look the most entertaining on TV? And I hope to God in the stewards room or with the race director, there is not someone going when Magnussen crashes going, hang on, let's not just go for a safety car. If we go for a red flag, that means we get a brilliant shootout for the win. I really hope that conversation is not happening when they're making these decisions, because that is just, there's now genuine suspicion that that's where the race direction and the direction of, from the stewards is to make it more entertaining. Okay, we've got, a few laps left to go. This would be a brilliant shootout for the win. Let's go for that option. Whereas, people going, well, why are they issuing a red flag? It's ruining the sport. And for a lot of people, I think they're getting pretty fed up of it. And I think it's tarnishing the product, because you never used to have it like this. I don't recall this like in the past, where you get questionable decisions from the officials that didn't follow a precedent or were changing things. But also they need to go back through the rule book and just in the regulations, and just make it make sense. So they don't. I understand why they have it for a safety car finish, underline, but that's not good for the sport. Having cars finish under safety car, that's not interesting. That's not what fans tune in for.
Yeah.
And, we waited half an hour to see a procession, basically,
Yep.
which was, I could have turned that off, as soon as the incident happened. Really, then you need to think, right, okay, if we have an incident in the last 5 laps, this is the precedent. Either we stop the race, we line up, we do a rolling start or a standing start, and we don't count any of the laps building up to that as part of the race, because they're not actually racing, like you said, because we what an absolutely pointless last lap of the race.
Yeah.
They just need to decide, okay, what makes sense, what's not, because they've just got it into themselves into knots, I think, on it. Really, it's too complicated, and also it's not easy to follow. No one, even the journalists and the the presenters and the commentators, it wasn't like they had a great insight. It wasn't like Twitter was going crazy. Everyone was going mental at trying to figure out what the precedent was, and it did feel a bit weird. How can Fernando Alonso go to 3rd place despite everyone saying him lose 3rd place on the track?
Yeah, I know. And even you take it back to Silverstone last year as well. Like in that situation, it wasn't even like a driver had a crash and there was loads of debris all over the track. It's like Yuki. No, it wasn't Yuki. Was it Yuki? No, who was it? Who had the big crash at Silverstone?
Zhao.
Oh, Zhao, that's right. Like he had a really big crash, but there wasn't anything blocking the track. And then lots of stuff happens in that short, few corners that followed. And then they threw a red flag. But because they hadn't finished the full sector, everybody went back to where they were at the beginning. And it was just like, well, a couple of drivers have made some really good moves there under racing conditions. You just robbed them of those places because of some really arbitrary rule you've put in place. I agree. Like the whole thing needs, I want to say ripping up and starting again, but it really does need a proper looking at, because it's just poor for the sport. And I'm kind of in the camp that, like, okay, fine, if they want to make the thing more entertaining, they want to make the sport more of a spectacle, I'm on board with that, but own that as a decision, because at the moment they've got their feet in both camps. They've got an old set of regulations that aren't designed to make things entertaining at all, and the fact that they're trying to apply these kind of, and I agree, there's definitely a narrative about let's find a way to make the sport a bit more interesting, and I totally sympathize, because I hate the safety car. I hate watching the cars follow it, and finishing under a safety car is so boring and stupid. Like, it's just not racing, is it? I totally sympathise with that position, but what they're trying to do at the moment is like have feet in both camps. It makes no sense.
Yeah.
They just need to make a decision about what it is they're trying to do with these things, and just do it.
And I think also, it's just, it's damaging the reputation of the sport, like, quite seriously now. I was reading the Times today. There's articles saying about, what is F1? Is it entertainment or is it a sport? And before you know it, it'll be called F1E, because it will be following sort of WWE wrestling. And it'll all be about entertainment, and it'll all be preconceived and arranged. And I pray to God that they're not making decisions because, oh, this will look great on TV, or think of this think of this incident and how they'll fight for the lead in Drive to Survive next season. I really, really hope they're not doing it, and I think they need to sort it out soon. This is my wild conspiracy theory is that Michael Massey returning to the paddock for the first time since Abu Dhabi 2021 this weekend jinxed it all. He's got some sort of weird spell around him or something like that. Just caused the FIA just to implode and just make nonsense and do what he would have done. That's what he would have done, right?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I'm all for blaming Michael Massey for many things, but I don't know. This is. I mean, this predated him. It's obviously continued since he left the sport.
But then, do you generally think F1 and FIA thought, well, we've not had the best, our own reporters found that we made a mistake in that final race of that season. We'll get rid of the chap. We'll make a few changes to those rules about, unlapping the safety car and stuff like that. But actually, that will never happen again, really. And they've kind of not properly thought about, well, hang on, what is the protocol? How are we going to respond if a similar sort of incident, or if there's an incident with a few laps to go? It just seems like they've almost sort of convinced themselves or tricked themselves that they fixed the problem by getting rid of Massey and then making a few small tweaks or changes to the rules.
So I previously on this podcast referred to the Red Bull graphic designers as the laziest people in Formula One. They are, I think they're only just ahead of a very, very close second in the shape of the FIA, because I don't think the FIA are like necessarily deliberately useless. I just think they're lazy, to be honest with you, Will. Like, it feels like the only time they ever get involved in any kind of changes, aside from like regulations around the cars specifically, which they always want to get involved in, right? They always want to mess with the teams and stuff they're trying to do with their cars and come up with new ways to try and slow teams down or bring the cars together or whatever. Apart from that, when it comes to actual sporting regulation, they make no changes at all until a problem arises. And that's it basically. They're not proactive. They don't think about what these things actually look like in a situation until it happens. So now I'm sure someone in the FIA is going, oh crap, we really should look at these regulations because look what happened in Australia. Like, they should have done this ages ago. And as you've alluded to, it does feel like this is happening. Similar events have happened before. Similar levels of kind of madness have followed and a lot of criticism. And you're right, it is impacting the sport and the brand. And if you look at the viewership of F1 is going down year on year and race on race. It is going down, and that is despite the brilliance of Drive to Survive and the brilliance of that 2021 season, which was amazing. But ever since then, the numbers have been consistently dropping. So they're clearly losing some of their audience somewhere or another, and this has to be a factor, I think.
Yeah, and I think also, I think you've hit a really good point there. Is that like they're almost getting found out by like incidents happening at race weekends. I mean, every race race weekend we've had in the last 2 years, there's been an issue with the rules where either when Max won in Japan and he won his World Championship, no one knew what was happening there because of the application of the rules. And then the previous year when they got full points despite only doing 2 laps in they couldn't drive the car around the circuit, they got full points, and then the FA go, oh yeah, hang on a second, we've got our rules wrong here, we need to go and update these. I think you're spot on. There's probably people going there, someone's going back to the FA this morning going, right lads, I think we need to pull this together and let's have a look at the rule book. And someone's going, no, don't worry, we've made those small tweaks, or it'll be fine. We've got really thorough. There definitely must be a culture problem where it's very conservative and they've sort of got their eyes sort of very blinker. They just don't want to look for the criticism. Yeah. And I wonder at what point do F1 turn around to the FIA and start saying this is unacceptable? You're ruining the product now. We're all about making entertainment, but you're taking the Michael. Yeah, taking the Michael message.
Very good. I mean, they're already it's already a very strange relationship, I think, isn't it, between the two? I mean, F1 were really fuming with the FIA about the whole rule changes in 2026 and trying to get other teams into the sport and making opportunities available to other teams and potentially diversifying the market for the current F1 teams. They were absolutely furious about that. So, yeah, there's clearly a disconnect, but it's very difficult to make a case for the FIA when things like this continually happen. I think like there are bits of the FIA that work, but they are the bits of the FIA where they recruit technical people well. Like anything to do with the cars and the technical design of the cars, they recruit people like Ross Brawn, or safety. Yeah, they recruit the right people with the right expertise and they get it right. But when it comes to the overall running of the sport, geez, I mean, they can't seem to get it right. And it's been a long time now that this has been a problem. And yeah, the more races we have where we're having stewards' inquiries and debates hours after the final car has crossed the finish line, the worse it feels, and the more pressing it is that the FIA fix it, because it's just detracting from the spectacle. And that's the whole point. Like the whole point of this is they want more people watching the sport. Like, how can you have a situation where something you've done and you're in complete control of is detracting from the spectacle you're trying to drive people to watch? So crazy.
Right, let's park this conversation just like Charles Leclerc parked his car on the gravel, and let's end with a bit of positivity. Let's end on some good news. As we've touched this earlier, McLaren scoring their first points of the season, buzzing for Oscar Piastri to get on the points board as well. His home race, I think it's the third Australia. Him, Webber, and Ricciardo all scored points at their home race in Australia and on their debuts there, which is a nice sort of tradition to continue as well. Much improved from previous weekends. What did you make of the papaya gang?
So I'm probably a bit less positive than you are about them. Like, I think they had a good weekend. They obviously came away with a load of points. I think a lot of those points they gained because of carnage ahead of them. Yeah, true. And that's fine. You can only make the most of what you've got available, right? But the car was still quite slow. I mean, they qualified 13th and 16th. And Lando Norris qualifying 13th, he will be quietly spitting feathers about that, I think, given he's a driver that consistently was in the top 5 for the last few years in a car, admittedly, that was slower than his rivals. But Lando has shown, particularly on kind of one lap pace, he's got a really canny ability of driving that car much faster than it probably could go or should go. But yeah, the race pace looks better, but yeah, I don't know. I think in a normal race, in a normal situation, I mean, lucky for them, as you've alluded to, we've got Baku coming up, and there is so much opportunity for carnage there that I could see McLaren picking up some more points again and everything being hunky-dory for a bit. But on pure pace, they've not really come that far, I don't think. They may be marginally quicker than before, but not a huge amount.
They just didn't make any of the mistakes or didn't get unlucky like they've done in the previous 2 weekends. So
yeah, and that's fair enough. You can only make the most of what's available, so...
Oh yeah, I really hope Baku is as mad as it is every year. I just think it's a bonkers circuit, but it just generates such brilliant races, and I really hope we get a good one. In a few weeks' time, I think that's a good one. One other thing, there's actually 2 things I want to cover off before we wrap up. Alpine, we've mentioned them already. They qualified 9th, 11th. But you were impressed by their race pace, am I correct in thinking?
Yes, they were good. They're really good race pace, actually. Gasly was able to keep up with Sainz, albeit with quite a powerful DRS sort of set of DRS zones throughout the circuit. And yeah, they were pretty unlucky to lose both cars in the melee. I'm sure there are lots of kind of non-Alpine fans who thought that was really funny because Alpine have been a bit of a meme previously. I mean, particularly with Alonso and Ocon last year,
but also with those 2 drivers as well. I think everyone's waiting for them to, fall out with each other and start attacking each other and sort of really clash on track. And I think everyone sort of thought, oh, here we're going to go. They're going to fall out over this. And I would love to know what Ocon's radio was, because I don't think they broadcast it, but I imagine his initial reaction wasn't too positive. But I did notice that the team did I think this is very, very deliberate from the team. They did a social media post where the 2 of them sat next to each other, sort of going like, "Oh, I've hit into Esteban here. Really sorry." And Esteban's like, "No, don't worry, guy. Like, it's fine, Pierre. Don't worry." So like, they're definitely managing that so it doesn't become a story. But I think it will bubble up in the next few races.
I'm sure it will at some point. Yeah, they will. They're very competitive and they're both pretty quick. So I think we'll probably see that. Yeah, as you say, that will bubble up in time. I thought Otmar's reaction was quite interesting there. He was so chill about the whole thing. Like, if that was me and I'd seen my 2 drivers collide, take each other out, both in point scoring positions, I would be pretty angry. And he was just like, "Oh yeah, that's pretty unlucky, but we've had good pace, so we've got 20 more races to go. See you next week," kind of thing.
I think that comes from a place of confidence in they know that they're going to regularly score points this season. So yeah, it's not great, but I think they'll be confident they can finish 4th in the championship.
Yeah, it's definitely possible. Ferrari are there for the taking.
Yeah, definitely. And finally, to end on, I just feel like I have to give a shout out to our man Yuki. What a weekend for him. Got a point in the end. David Croft was absolutely loving it that he was going to get 3 consecutive 11 place finishes. And honestly, I could have, I was ready to put my fist to the TV towards the end. But I was like, he literally any moment to bring it up, he'd get a mention. It's not that interesting. It's 11th place, and thank God he got 10th place because it meant that Crofty couldn't wheel that out again. But yeah, good to see him get a point, really. I'm intrigued to see how he goes on now for the end of the season.
Yep.
And so with that, we conclude our Australian Grand Prix episode.
Yep. It was an eventful one. Thanks for joining us. Remember to subscribe and leave a review on your podcast platform of choice. If you enjoyed it, why don't you share your podcast with a friend? Hopefully they enjoy the pod, and if they don't, then you should consider it a giant FIA red flag. If you want to follow us,
that was that. Hang on, we got to stop that. We have to give appreciation to that. That was very good. I think that's your best one yet.
Well, thanks, mate. Well, I'll keep looking to improve. If you want to follow us on Twitter, please do. We're at Lights Out Lads, and on Instagram we are at the Lights Out Pod. Thanks very much. Will, what do we have in store for next week?
So there's no race this weekend, sadly, because of Easter, and we've got a couple of weeks gap before Baku, till brilliant Baku. So I thought for next week's episode, Sam, we could discuss what changes we want to see made to Formula One, Would there be anything we bring back from the past that they've got rid from the sport, or do we want to? Is there new ideas that we've got that we want to see innovation? I think anything's on the table. I think we can have a fun, interesting conversation about the future of Formula One. What does innovation look like in Formula One to the actual sport, not just the cars? So yeah, we'll be back with you next Tuesday to discuss that. So yeah, thanks very much for listening. All the best and goodbye.
Bye bye.